Good morning.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. People will call as our next witness Brian Barron.
When you get to the witness stand, remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Brian Barron, Barron.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Barron.
Good morning.
Who do you work for, please?
Currently, I work for the city of Guadalupe as a police officer.
How long have you been a police officer?
About 6.5 years.
And for the city of Guadalupe that entire time?
Correct.
At some time in your past, were you an employee of Neverland Ranch?
Yes.
And what did you do for Neverland Ranch?
I was a security officer there.
How long were you a security officer at Neverland?
For about 5.5 years.
Was that continuous or sporadic?
It was sporadic. It was over 3 periods of time.
Can you characterize approximately what those 3 periods were?
I started in the fall of 1997. Worked for about a year. I was in the police academy at that time. I then got hired by Guadalupe Police Department. Left the ranch for about a year. And then went back again about 9 or 10 months after that, and was there for about 3 years, 3.5 years.
And when did you ultimately leave your employment at Neverland?
It was about April or May of last year.
And whose decision was that to leave?
Mine.
Tell me what your duties were as a security officer at Neverland Ranch.
Our duties consisted of the ranch itself, securing the ranch itself, the guests on the ranch, the owner of the ranch, and anything that had to do with the ranch as far as first aid, security. Anything that we could do to help, we would do. But mostly it was to secure the ranch, the owner, and the guests that were there, the employees.
Did you have set days and hours that you worked?
Generally, yes. Hours, yes. At times the days weren't always set, but hours, yes.
So during your time working there, did you always work days or nights? Or you tell me.
Generally I worked nights for the entire time I was there.
And tell me what a night shift would consist of.
Night shift would consist of 6 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. and then we would do rotating shifts at the front gate. And then we would do, which would be about 4 hours per person at the gate. And then secure the ranch after you've done your, before or after you've done your gate time.
So if you can, give me a description of an evening of work at Neverland Ranch from the time that you check in to the time that you finish your evening's work and you go home. And I'm interested in particularly where you go, where you are on the ranch at various times.
Okay, if I were to get there at 6 p.m. and were to take the first shift at the gate, I would be at the gate from 6 p.m. till about 10:15. And that would be checking in and out people who are coming in and off the property, answering phones, doing whatever was necessary there.
So when you'd come to work, there's a gate that approximates the perimeter of the property, is that?
Correct.
Or is that inside the property?
No, that would be the guardhouse at the front gate. So you'd come in the gate there and there's a guard.
Okay, there's a house there, a guardhouse?
Yeah.
And when you'd come to work, would you just check in at the gate and stay there, or would you go to the main house first and go back to the gate?
Sorry, we'd go to the main house first, get any pass on information that was going to happen that we needed to know that had happened on the prior shift or the things that we needed to know from the oncoming shift. That would be just speaking with the officers who were there at the house office. Security office.
And where is that located?
If you can imagine the entire house property, and if you were looking at it from the front, it would be on the far left. Sorry, it would be on the far left of the building. There's a main house, a walkway, Mr. Jackson's office, video library, and the security office.
So the security office is contiguous to the main house structure?
By way of a breezeway.
Okay. And access to the security office, is that an exterior door or an interior door?
It's an exterior door.
Does it have any interior connection to other parts of that structure?
No.
When you go in the security office, how many rooms are there?
There's 2.
And could you describe them for me?
First room had a desk in it, had a computer in it, so it technically had 2 desks in it, one on each side of the wall. There was a window that faced out towards the front property, the front lawn area of the house. And then that would be basically the inside of that room. There was also in that room a grease board that we put pass-on information on, guest information on. And then as you go into the next room, it was basically a break room. There was lockers, refrigerator, and a table to eat on.
What was the computer used for in the first room you mentioned?
Mostly what we used it for was generating our forms that we use on a daily basis, accident forms. It wasn't really used for much. We would create, reports on that computer, security reports, anything that had to do with us. If there was we noticed damage to something on the property, we would write it up on the computer there. But that was mostly what that computer was used for.
Alright, so moving back to our chronology of a day in the life of a security guard. You check with the main office. If you have gate duty, you go out to the gate. What next?
If you don't have gate duty, then you would start your regular patrols. First thing you would do when you got on the property was make sure, we would know who was there, if we had guests, if the owner was on the property. And we would check all of the doors around the house first. We'd do a check of the house area, make sure all the doors were locked, everything was in order. If buildings needed to be opened, that those buildings were opened around the house area. And then we would, after completing that check, we would do a similar check to the rest of the properties on the residence, any other buildings on the residence.
If you're on patrol, would you be doing continuous checks?
Hourly checks.
And what would you be doing between those checks?
Stuff to keep busy. We did a lot of training. The fire department, they're trained regularly, and we would assist with that. We were all basically part of the same group.
How many security guards are on duty during an evening shift?
When I was working there, it was between 3 and 4.
How many on a day shift?
About the same.
And as far as the next thing you do in your evening's work, would you continue to do these security checks throughout the evening?
That's correct.
How many would you do in an evening?
If we did 1 an hour, 12. If we did more, it would depend on need.
Okay. And where would a security check take you on the property?
Everywhere.
Would different officers check out different areas?
No. We'd check all, being there would only be 2 of us at the house. If there was 3 of us working, there would be 1 of us at the gate and 2 of us at the house office. If there were guests or anyone on the property that was at the house area, one of us would stay there, and the other one would check all the doors on the residence, all the buildings, on the property, everything.
As far as checking the doors of the main residence, did you have a key to the main residence?
Yes.
And what door did that open?
The back door.
Okay. As far as, did the main residence has a punch card that can?
A keypad.
That can give you access?
Like a telephone pad.
Did you have the code to that keypad?
No.
Did you have the code to the keypad that gave access into Mr. Jackson's private suite?
No.
Did any of the security guards, as far as you know?
Not that I'm aware.
When you'd work in the security guard booth at the entrance to the property, tell me about what your duties would be there.
Duties there were generally letting people on and off the ranch. We had paperwork that would allow us, that we would know ahead of time who was allowed to come on the ranch, whether that would be guests, or it would be general deliveries, contractors, things of that nature. We would know who was coming and who was supposed to be there for that day, so we would have those people come on and off. We also checked in all the employees and checked out all the employees, times they were in, times they were out. Every time they came or left the property. Answering phones was a large part of it. The majority of the phone calls that came in, especially in the evening time, they all came basically through us.
When you were conducting your duties as a security officer at Neverland, did you have occasion to see the owner of the property?
Yes.
And that would be Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Is he seated to my right, the man with the black hair?
Yes.
And how much would you see Mr. Jackson on the property, assuming, let me strike that question. How often would you see Mr. Jackson on the property during those times when he was visiting Neverland or staying at Neverland?
Daily, at least.
Okay. And would you be able to see him? Would you see him interacting with guests when they were on the property?
Occasionally.
Would you ever talk to Mr. Jackson personally?
Only if I needed to.
Okay. And how often would you have contact with him?
Not on a regular basis. Only if there was something pressing that he needed to know or we needed to ask him. We tried to let him have his privacy when he was there.
You mentioned forms that are prepared on the computer. Are there daily logs that are kept at Neverland?
Yes.
What are the daily logs?
The daily logs that we kept at the gatehouse, where those logs were kept always, was the employee entry list, the daily activity list, which would include, like I said, anybody other than employees coming on and off the property, which would mean anything, general contractors, deliveries, anything like that, any guests that were on the property. Also our time checks for all of the, we would call in the start of a check of the ranch, a security check, all the doors, and we would call in anything that would happen that we would find out of the ordinary and log that at the gate. And then the end of that check also.
Were these logs used during the entire, I believe, 4 years that you said you worked there?
About 5 years, yes.
5 years you worked there?
They changed. At times they looked different, but they were basically the same.
What about accident reports? You mentioned those. How are they prepared?
In the same fashion. Initially we would let whoever was at the gate know that we found something or something had happened, somebody had wrecked one of the golf carts or fallen down, whatever the case may be. We would let, either the gate would let us know, because they called the gate, or we would let the gate know, because we were notified at the house. And then we would prepare that form after the conclusion of whatever was going on.
How often would you have to prepare accident reports?
Not often. I didn't prepare very many. The day shift usually prepared more, because more things, there's more people, more activity on the ranch, more employees. More guest activity during the daytime generally. But, a couple times a month.
You mentioned they'd be prepared if a golf cart was wrecked? Would that be a common occurrence?
It happened. It seemed to happen a lot more than it needed to, yeah.
Why do you say that?
Objection. Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. Tell me, was there a difference in the attitude and demeanor of employees when Mr. Jackson was on property as opposed to when he was off?
Yes.
How would you describe that?
Tense.
Can you elaborate on that? Why would employees be tense?
Well, they would have to get there earlier usually. They'd have more work to do. He's very, at least the way I feel, is he's very, like a perfectionist, everything has to be right. His property, his prerogative to be that way. But there was a lot more work to be done. Everybody just seemed to be walking on pins and needles a little bit more just to make sure things were right.
Madam Clerk, do we have a notebook with Exhibits 300, ed seq?
Yes.
Thank you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Barron, I show you a black notebook that appears to have numerous records in it. It is labeled as Exhibits 300 through 335. I'd like you to take a moment and look at that. I don't really want you to look at every exhibit, but
That's all right.
if you could just kind of thumb through it quickly.
They look very familiar.
Alright, have you looked at a notebook like that?
Yes.
And can you identify those records for me, please?
Yes. They are the employee in and out logs, the gate activity logs, and the daily entry access logs.
And are these the type of logs that you were talking about when you said that you personally would prepare records at Neverland?
They are the logs.
Okay. Now, just to help us a little bit with the various types of forms here, looking at exhibit number 300, the first page, can you tell us what that is, please?
That's an accident or damage report.
Alright. And is that the type of report that would be prepared by a security officer in his normal duties at Neverland Ranch?
Yes.
Did you yourself ever prepare these reports?
Yes.
Does this look to be an authentic copy or an authentic document as far as an accident damage report?
Yes.
Would these reports, the accident damage reports, be prepared in the normal course of your duties as a security officer at Neverland Ranch?
Yes.
When would these reports be prepared in relation to the accident that they are describing?
Generally right after, or very soon after whatever happened.
And as the information, does the person who prepares these reports have a duty to accurately describe what is in the report itself?
Yes.
Moving on to Exhibit 301, it appears to be a daily log. Is that, in fact, what it is?
Yes.
And tell me what type of daily log this is.
This would be the employee in and out entry and exist list. So the time you were in and time you were out, if you were there overnight. You notice there's CO here, carry over, you were carried over from the midnight hour to the next day.
Okay, and there are numerous names on there?
Yes.
Are those the names of the employees at Neverland?
Yes.
And the written in information, in and out, depicts the time that they checked in and the time they checked out?
Correct.
Again, this is a report that's prepared in the ordinary course of your duties as a security officer?
Yes.
And does the security officer have a duty to accurately record the information in this report?
Yes.
And is it prepared at or near the time of the entries that are made?
At the time.
Okay. Now, there appears to be a, turning over page 301, on the back of it and on the next page there appears to be a report entitled, Daily Entry Access.
Correct.
Tell me what that is.
That would be the entry and access of anybody who normally would come on the ranch. Most of these on the top part of it are deliveries, and then those on the bottom would be the guests who are on the ranch.
Okay.
For that day.
Again, the same question. Are those parts of your duties as an officer at the ranch?
Yes.
And are they prepared at or near the time of the events recorded in that report?
At the time.
And your duty is to prepare those reports accurately?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm also looking at a report now that is on the back page of exhibit number 302. It's entitled, Gate Activity Log. Tell me what that is, please.
The gate activity log is, like I was explaining earlier, when something happens or there's some information that officers need to know or anybody else who may need to know, we would write it down on the gate activity log. The top part of that paperwork is the officer who was working the gate and the time that they were there. And then the center part is, again, that information that would be necessary for officers to know or to pass along to other people who are coming on and off the ranch, and that information is written down at the time it's given and then there's a time that it's given. If it says, CO, which again is carryover, that would mean that's something that needs to be on this list for an extended period of time, so that we're aware of it. And then the bottom portion is the time we start our checks of the ranch, and then the time we finish the house checks, and then the exterior patrols also.
Okay. I hate to be redundant, but I have to ask you the same questions. Is that prepared in the ordinary course of your duties as a security officer at the ranch?
Yes.
Is it a document that your duty is to accurately describe the gate activity at the time that it is happening or contemporaneous with the information that's in that log?
Yes.
And you yourself have filled these logs out and are familiar with how these are prepared?
Many of them, yes.
Alright. And I asked you previously if you had reviewed a book similar to this. There's one more page here that I think I'll ask you about. Looking at 320, there is a security clearance and guest information form.
Correct.
Tell me what that is.
That would be given to the gate. For instance, this one was given hopefully the day before, so it's June 18th of 02, telling us that the next day this gentleman would be coming onto the property, that did he not need to sign a confidentiality form, and then what he was going to be doing or where he needed to go.
Okay, so before you'd let somebody on the ranch, would one of these have to be filled out if they were not already a guest or employee?
Yes.
And were you notified beforehand whether to let a guest onto the property or not?
Yes.
Would guests be allowed on the property if you did not have a form authorizing their admission?
No.
Showing you exhibit 333, there appears to be an emergency medical report. What is that, please?
That would be if someone was injured, one of the firefighters, who were for the most part all EMTs, would complete one of these forms for the ranch purposes to have record of whatever the accident, where they had been injured had happened.
Okay, and same questions there, duty to accurately prepare that information?
Yes.
You're familiar with how that information's prepared?
Yes.
You filled those out yourself?
I think maybe one I filled out for the EMT that was working on the person, just handwriting for them. I never did one of my own.
These are prepared at or near the time of the event that's recorded?
Yes.
And there's a duty to accurately depict the information on there?
Yes.
And then I'm showing you lastly a Neverland Valley medical report log. Have you ever seen one of those?
Yes.
Tell me what that is.
That is a log of all the medical reports that were done for the year. So all of them had their incident report number, the date, who took it, the time it was taken, the name of the person, what happened, the injury, and then what type of treatment they were given.
Okay, the person filling that form out had a duty to prepare it accurately?
Yes.
Prepared at or near the time of the act, condition or event that's depicted in the form?
Yes.
And you're familiar with how those are prepared?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm showing you. I don't think we've gone over one of these yet, have we?
Again, that's the same, it's just a different looking form. It's the blanket routine form, the guest form, and then ranch. Again, a lot of these forms changed. This is the same form as one of the earlier forms that we looked at.
This is a form in Exhibit 335. It's on the back page of one, well, on the second page, there appears to be one. So this is a similar form as far as guest activity?
It's the exact same, it's just written different.
Excuse me, Your Honor. 335 has a number of pages, as far as I can tell. What page are we talking about?
I had said the second page. Turn the page over and it's on the back side of the first page.
May I approach, Your Honor? I think the book that we were given may be out of order in 335.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Do you have 335? It should be the second page.
You have it on the backside.
We doubled it up.
All right, thank you.
So all the questions I'd asked you before would apply to this one as well.
Yes.
That you've spoken about, guest activity logs and such?
Yes.
Okay. And I previously asked you if you had a chance to review these records. Would your testimony be the same concerning all of the records that are contained in this notebook regarding the accuracy of the information, the duty to prepare accurate information? All these records were prepared at or near the time of the events that were recorded?
Yes.
And you're familiar with their method and mode of preparation?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd ask that Exhibits 300 through 335 be admitted at this time.
And I take it they're offered as a business record.
They are.
I have no objection to that foundation.
All right, they're admitted as business records.
Thank you. Mr. Barron, you said when you were doing your daily duties, conducting your daily duties as a security guard, you'd have occasion to see Mr. Jackson on the property?
Yes.
Would you have occasion to see him interacting with his guests?
Occasionally, yes.
Would you have occasion to see guests when they weren't interacting with Mr. Jackson on the property?
Yes.
Do you know an individual by the name of Frank Tyson or Cassio?
Yes.
Who is Frank Tyson or Cassio?
From what I originally knew, he was a friend of the family, of Mr. Jackson's family, or a friend of Mr. Jackson. His family, his parents and brothers and sister were friends. At some point I believe he became an employee of Mr. Jackson. What his exact duties were I don't really know. But he was, at some point, he became an employee.
And do you have a time frame for when he was an employee, approximate?
I would say probably around, maybe around the year 2000, right around in there.
Okay.
And whether he still is or is not, I don't know, but
Did Frank Cassio ever live at Neverland?
he stayed there a lot. Whether he lived there or not, as far as his primary residence, I don't know. But he was there quite often.
Would he stay there longer than a month?
Yeah, at times I think he would, yes.
Did you have occasion to observe his relationship with Mr. Jackson?
Not on a real personal level, between the two of them, no.
Did you see them together?
Yes.
Would Mr. Cassio ever spend time in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
I have no idea.
Objection. Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
I'll withdraw that question. And you can strike the answer, that's fine.
So moved.
All right, so granted.
Do you feel that you have sufficient information to describe their relationship?
Yes.
And how would you describe their relationship?
I would describe it.
I would object as no foundation. I believe he said he didn't observe their relationship.
Sustained.
When you said you observed them together, where would you observe them?
Generally on the ranch, in the movie theater. I'd seen them riding the quads on the ranch before. Just doing general activities. In the park, I'd seen them in the park before, the theme park.
How many times do you think you'd seen them before, approximately, if you can estimate?
I'm going to object as vague as to time.
During the entire period of time that you were a security guard.
Maybe 75 to 100 times. I mean, in passing I would see them together.
And did you? How many times? If you could estimate, how many nights during that period of time, 5-year period of time, did Frank Cassio spend at Neverland?
Oh.
Well, I'm going to object as lack of foundation.
Sustained.
You said that you were familiar with the logs in terms of who was staying on the property.
Yes.
Was that part of your daily duties?
Yes.
When Frank Cassio visited the property, would he be noted in that log as a visitor spending the night?
Yes.
On how many occasions, could you estimate, did Frank Cassio spend the night during that 5-year period?
I'm going to object as lack of foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Hundreds.
Who is Vinny? Do you know an individual? Let me start with that. Do you know an individual who visited Neverland named Vinny?
Yes.
Who was Vinny?
As far as I know, Vinny was a friend of Frank.
And do you know the period of time when Vinny visited Neverland?
No, not offhand I don't.
Do you know approximately, did Vinny spend the night at Neverland?
Yes, I do know that he spent the night occasionally at Neverland Ranch.
Do you know how many nights he spent?
No.
Do you know an individual by the name of Mark Schaffel?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Schaffel?
Just from his coming to the ranch.
Do you know how often he would visit the ranch?
Vague as to time.
During the period of time that you were a security guard.
Not very often, but he would come probably 3 or 4 times a year maybe.
Do you know an individual by the name of Ronald Konitzer?
I know the name.
Okay. Did you ever meet him?
Not that I'm aware of.
How about Dieter Weisner?
Yes.
Did you meet Mr. Weisner?
Yes.
Where did you meet him?
At the ranch.
And if you can characterize, again I'm asking for your best estimation, if you can provide it, how many times did Dieter visit the ranch?
Several times. He was there, he would stay sometimes for a couple of days, and then he'd be gone for a while and come back. It wasn't a regular thing that he was there. For a short period of time it was, maybe 2 or 3 months I believe he was there on a somewhat regular basis, but generally it was off and on.
Can you characterize the period of time that you observed Dieter on the ranch in terms of the 5 years you were there?
It would have been.
Beginning time to when you left.
Probably sometime in 2002 to 2003.
Okay. Now, did you have occasion to see children visit the ranch?
Yes.
How were children treated at the ranch?
Well.
What do you mean by that?
It was a fun place to go. They got to do pretty much whatever they wanted, for the most part. Not all of them, but they were treated quite well.
Are you familiar with some visitors to the ranch who were local residents of Los Olivos?
Yes.
Do you know their names?
I can't remember right now.
How many were there?
3.
Were they boys or girls?
Boys.
What ages?
Teenage.
Were any of them related?
2 of them were.
And how often would they visit the ranch?
For a short period of time quite regularly.
Do you have numbers on those?
45, 46, and 47. Mr. Barron, I show you people's 45. Does that look, can you recognize that?
Yes, I recognize that.
And who would that be?
His name, their names are completely.
Is that one of the people you're talking about?
Yes.
How about 46?
Yes.
Is that one of the boys you're talking about?
Yes.
47?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have occasion to see how those young men conduct themselves at the Neverland property?
Yes.
How would you describe their conduct?
Destructive.
And why do you say that?
Whenever they were there, we had broken carts. Damaged carts. They at some point threw eggs at my security chief's car, inside, outside. We're talking dozens of eggs. There just always seemed to be something broken or some problem when they were there.
Do you know if they ever got in trouble for this type of conduct?
Objection. Lack of foundation.
Sustained.
You mentioned a grease board at the security office.
Yes.
And what specifically was that grease board used for?
Specifically, it was for guest information, names of people who were in which guest unit or where they were staying on the ranch. And then a pass on board, just write notes on the board for the oncoming shift or something that happened, just so that it was remembered. Anything that we needed to remember on a daily basis could have been put up on that board.
Who was your supervisor?
I had, Violet Silva was the security chief, and then Curtis Gordon was a supervisor and Julio Magana was a supervisor.
Did you have any supervisorial capacity as security guard?
Yeah, I had a shift supervisor. Curtis and Julio would work generally day shift. And then when I was there in the evening, I would be the shift supervisor. They were supervisors to me, but I would be in charge of the shift at night.
Okay. At some point, and let me just be clear. What do you mean when you say, grease board?
A white board that you use the wipeable ink markers on.
Okay. So like a chalkboard or similar, but you can.
Similar, yes.
But you can wipe the ink off?
Yes.
At some point during your employment at Neverland, did you see a directive on that board concerning Gavin Arvizo?
Yes.
Do you know who Gavin Arvizo is?
Yes.
First of all, tell us how you know Gavin Arvizo.
Because he was a guest at the ranch.
Okay, so you knew him by sight?
Yes.
And tell us what that directive was.
It simply stated, Gavin is not allowed off property.
Can you tell me the approximate time that, your best recollection as to when that directive appeared on the grease board?
It was early part of 2003, January, February.
Do you know the exact date?
No.
Do you know how long it was on the grease board?
I remember it being approximately a week.
Okay. If Gavin Arvizo appeared at the front gate during this period of, well, let me back up, first of all. What did that directive mean to you in terms of a security officer?
That we weren't to allow him off property without some sort of permission from a supervisor.
Okay.
That would be, I would check first.
Okay. So if Gavin Arvizo appeared at the gate, walking out of the ranch, would you let him pass?
No.
If Gavin Arvizo appeared at the gate being driven out by Jesus Solace, would you let him pass?
I would check first with the ranch manager.
So would you say you wouldn't let him pass before getting authorization?
No.
Well, I'll withdraw it.
All right.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Barron, how are you?
Good.
You're a sworn peace officer, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you went to the Allen Hancock Police Academy?
Yes.
And you have been a police officer, an active duty police officer with the Guadalupe Police Department for how long?
6.5 years.
And during the entire time during the entire past 6.5 years consecutively, you have been a police officer, correct?
That's correct.
So at no time during the last 6.5 years have you not been a sworn peace officer?
Correct.
You worked at Neverland while you were going to the academy, correct?
That's correct.
And then after you finished the academy, you got a job with Guadalupe as a sworn peace officer, correct?
Correct.
And when was that?
The day I started with Guadalupe?
Sure.
September 28th of 1998.
Okay, so since September of 1998 to the present, you've been a sworn peace officer?
Correct.
And sometimes you worked at Neverland Ranch as a security person as well, is that correct?
Correct.
So you were moonlighting, as it were?
Yes.
And at some point you were aware that there was a raid on Neverland, is that correct?
Yes.
Were you there that day?
No.
After you learned there was a raid at Neverland, did you have a discussion with your chief of police at Guadalupe?
Yes.
As a result of that discussion with the chief of police, did you determine that you should resign your position as a security guard?
Yes. It was more like step away from it for a while.
Okay. In other words, between you and your chief, you decided there's an ongoing criminal investigation. As a peace officer, you probably should not also be working at the ranch. Is that correct?
At that time, that's what I decided, yes.
And when was that, approximately? Was that right after the raid?
I was on vacation at that time, at the time of the search warrant. And then so shortly after I came home from vacation.
Alright, so sometime maybe end of November?
What day was the raid?
November 18th, 2003.
Yeah, correct. I think I came home from vacation the last couple days of November, so shortly after that. Maybe the first week of December.
Alright, and you did not cease your employment. I was going to say quit, but you actually stepped away for a while. You took a leave?
Yes.
You did not do that because you had seen anything unlawful at the ranch, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, had you seen anything unlawful at the ranch from 1998 to the time that you stepped away from the job, you would have been duty-bound to report that, correct?
Absolutely.
And in fact, as a sworn peace officer, you probably, if you saw a criminal activity, you probably would have been duty-bound to either investigate or even make an arrest. Is that correct?
Yes. To a point.
Okay, at the very least report it?
Correct.
Alright, and you found no need whatsoever to do that the entire time that you were there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The people at Neverland Ranch that you worked with were made aware that you were a police officer. Is that correct?
They all knew.
Alright, there was no secret?
No secret.
And you were given access to every part of the ranch that any other security officer was given access to. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You reported, you said, to Mr. Magana and Mr. Gordon?
Correct.
And then Violet Silva was the chief of security at the time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you have a good relationship with Violet Silva?
Very good.
And was she a professional chief of security?
Yes.
Alright, now, I know that a lot of times law enforcement might look at security guards as, somewhat cynically. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Did you feel that this security department was run in a professional fashion?
Yes.
To a certain extent, the security department included the use of various police procedures. Is that correct?
To a small extent, yes.
General radio etiquette, for instance?
Yes.
Making sure that you logged things inappropriately?
Correct.
Did Violet Silva, for instance, let's take her. Did Violet Silva insist that the people under her command, as it were, keep accurate records?
Yes.
Alright, did Violet Silva insist that the people under her make sure that the various places on the ranch were secure?
Yes.
And there was a regular detail, or irregular, let me withdraw that. There was a regular procedure to go through and check the various locations during the evening and the night to make sure that the ranch was secure. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, during the time you were there, was there a risk that intruders would get onto the ranch?
Absolutely.
Did any intruders get onto the ranch during the time that you were there?
Yes.
Were there ever occasions that you were aware of that intruders actually got to the house?
Yes.
Did any intruders actually get into the house?
Yes.
Were law enforcement officers called eventually to deal with those intruders?
Yes.
In fact, that was the protocol, if you found somebody trespassing, to call for law enforcement?
Correct.
Now, I understand you were law enforcement, but you would call the sheriff's department at that point, correct?
Yes.
And I may be going a little fast and then you're kind of stepping on the end of my questions, and I may be asking too quickly. It makes it hard for the court reporter.
I apologize.
That's all right, I apologize. We'll just slow down a little bit, both of us. Alright, now, you explained the situation out there and I just want to go over it in a little more detail. There are basically two main security posts, stationary posts at the ranch, is that right?
That's right.
There's the gate, which is the little house right by the big front gates, correct?
Correct.
Now, at that little house, and the big front gates, in the little house there's a computer and a desk, is that correct?
That's correct.
Telephone?
Yes.
Is the phone often answered by, at that phone?
Yeah, a lot.
Alright, so people calling into the ranch, particularly at night, the phone will ring there, and the security guard at that phone will answer it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, and then the phone can be, or the call can be forwarded from that phone to other phones.
Basically any phone on the ranch.
And the phone that's at the gate is a regular telephone within that. Let me back up. There's a system and the phones are pretty.
It's a multi-line phone.
They're pretty much identical phones throughout the ranch?
Yes, I believe they're all the same.
So this is not a big phone with a lot of buttons on it. It's a smaller phone. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you get an incoming call and then you would forward it by using a code to forward it. Is that correct?
Transfer it to whatever extension it needed to go to.
Alright, the gates at the guardhouse, there are big iron gates, is that correct, the front gate?
Well, maybe on the inside. They're wood.
Or wood gates. I'm sorry. I think you were right. They're big wooden gates, in any event?
Yes.
And they're anchored by, I think, stone walls on either side. Is that correct?
Yes.
If you stand at the gates looking out to Figueroa Mountain Road, to the road there, and you were to go to the left of the guardhouse.
Okay.
As you're looking out to the left of the guardhouse, how far does the stonework extend, roughly?
Maybe 20, 25 feet. 30 feet maybe at the max.
Okay, and after that 30 feet, what kind of fencing protection do you have?
Very little. 2-plank ranch fencing. It's nice. It looks like, but it's maybe about 4 feet tall.
And 2 rails?
2 rails and then posts however many feet.
And there's no wire on that or anything else, correct?
No.
So people can pretty much hop over that if they want to?
Yes.
Alright, as you go around the rest of the ranch as you get farther away from the gate, at some point there's some fencing, cattle-type fencing. Is that correct?
Cattle, barbed wire fencing.
Alright, now, you mentioned that there was another location which was up by the house, I think, for another stationary location for the guards. Is that correct?
The house security office, correct.
And that's not in the house itself?
No.
It's at the end of the building that's adjacent to the house. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in there, you have an initial room that includes a desk and the computer and so on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there's a rack of battery chargers for the portable radios?
It may be in that room, now. It was in the other room before when I was there.
Okay, in any event, there's the initial room that you walk into, and then behind it is sort of a break room. Is that correct?
Correct.
It's got a few lockers. Is that right?
That's right.
The break table and some chairs, right?
Yes.
Is that where that board is that you were telling us about?
No, it was in the first room.
In the first room. Alright, now, let me ask you something. The gate logs that you told us about that are among the documents that you authenticated from Exhibit 300 to 335. I realize there's some other documents that aren't gate logs in there.
Yes.
But the gate logs that are in those documents, those gate logs are used to communicate information to the various guards who are on duty or who come on duty. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, I realize, or let me ask you this. You had previously told law enforcement that you believed that this, what you called or what Mr. Auchincloss called a directive, that this note about Gavin Arvizo was on the grease board?
Yes.
And are you aware that none of the other officers recall seeing it on the grease board?
Objection. That assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Are you aware of any other officer who claims to have seen that on the grease board?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible that this particular notation was, in fact, on a gate log instead of the grease board?
I'm sure it was on a gate log.
Okay. And in fact, it's on the gate log for February the 19th. Is that right?
I don't know the date that it's on there.
You remember seeing it on the gate log. Is that correct?
No.
Okay. You said it was on the gate log?
I now know that it was on the gate log.
Okay. Alright. Do you have the book up there?
It's right here.
This is the official book. Alright. Now, you say you're aware it's on the gate log. Did somebody show it to you?
I was told.
By the prosecution?
Yes.
Okay. And who told you that?
The district attorney.
Which one?
Auchincloss.
Mr. Auchincloss.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay, Your Honor. What I'd like to do, I'm going to take this page out of the book. The entire book has been admitted, and there are exhibit tabs, official court exhibit tabs on the first page of each exhibit. So I am taking a page out of 334. And at the bottom, this page says, MJ00154. And I'd ask permission to put this up on the screen, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. I'll back up. First of all, I'll represent to you I just took that. As I said to the court, I took that out of the book here. That's one of the various pages. Does that appear to be a gate activity log?
Yes.
And there's a number up on the top which we'll focus in on a little more. It says February 19th, 03. It's a little fuzzy there, but.
Correct.
And the purpose of this gate activity log would be to record pretty much contemporaneously activities that occurred during the security shift. Is that true?
That's correct.
And it's also for the purpose of recording information that should be communicated to other officers on other shifts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, I'm going to, with any luck, focus in so we can read it, but we'll see about that. Okay, do you see there? It says, 3 lines up from the bottom, on the middle of the page, it says 1752.
Yes.
What does 1752 represent?
5:52 p.m.
Military time. So it's 5:52 in the afternoon, correct?
Correct.
That would be the time that somebody recorded the information on that line adjacent to it. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the line adjacent to it says, the kids are not to leave per Joe. Kids, meaning like Gavin, Star, etc., correct?
Correct.
Alright, were you aware that that particular evening was the evening that these children were to go down to Los Angeles?
Objection. Assumes facts.
That's.
Foundation. Sustained.
Well, I asked if he was aware. Should I rephrase it? Let me do it this way, Your Honor. I won't make that request.
The foundation's a little different, too. Go ahead and rephrase it.
Alright, let's do it this way. A couple of questions. Just in general, if children are on the ranch, are guests at the ranch and they're staying there and there's not a parent present, would it be the policy of the ranch not to allow those children to go off of the ranch property without supervision?
Correct.
I'll object as vague as to children.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, we would not let them go off the property by themselves.
So at this time, do you know whether or not there was a parent at the ranch with Gavin, Star? Well, it was Gavin, Star, etc. So we'll say with Gavin and Star.
I don't know for sure. I don't believe there was.
Alright, so that would be a reasonable instruction for security in general, correct?
Objection. Argumentative. Calls for a conclusion.
Sustained on argumentative.
It would not be out of the ordinary, then, to not let children such as Gavin and Star leave the ranch without approval or without supervision, correct?
Correct.
And based on your experience, if children or any guests were scheduled to leave as a group, would it be appropriate for security to be alerted so that the people would be there to leave in the vehicle that was assigned to take them? Does that make sense? It was a long question.
Would it be appropriate to have security notified?
Yeah.
If they were going to be leaving?
Yes.
It would have been appropriate. It didn't happen very often, but.
So if there was a bus or a limousine that was going to leave and certain kids were going to be on it, that's something that security could well be advised of, correct?
Should well be advised of. We weren't always advised.
Weren't always advised. But if you were advised, you'd feel that was appropriate, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to put that page back where I found it. Close the book so I don't mix things up, and we'll come back to it in a moment. Alright, now let's work backwards just a little bit here. You were asked about Frank Cassio, correct?
Correct.
And was he also known by another name?
Frank Tyson.
Frank Tyson. Okay, Frank?
Frank.
As far as Frank Cassio, Frank Tyson was concerned, was he there? You said he stayed over, as far as you could tell, quite a number of times, right?
Right.
And the district attorney asked you if this was logged in the logs when he might be staying over.
Correct.
Did you go back and look at the logs and add up the times?
No.
Alright, so you're really not answering that question based on reviewing the logs, is that right?
I reviewed the logs, but did not write down or memorize how many times he'd been there.
Alright, so your general impression was that he stayed overnight quite a number of times, correct?
Yes.
And did Frank Cassio have any other family members who you were aware of?
Yes.
And did they often stay over?
Yes.
Did his father come out and visit from time to time?
Yes.
Did his brother and sister visit from time to time?
Yes.
Any other family members you can recall?
His mother had been there.
Okay.
I think he had 2 brothers.
Alright.
I believe.
Very good. So his brothers, his sister, and both of his parents would stay over from time to time, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright. Now, were there times during your span there, when Frank Cassio or his family might be there, and then there would be a period of time where he wouldn't be around and he or his family would come back at some later time.
Meaning that?
That was a bad question.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Fair enough. Just tell me. In other words, you say he was there. From the time that you were employed to the time that you left the ranch, you said he was there many times. Maybe you saw him 75 to 100 times with Michael Jackson. He stayed over many times, right?
Yes.
Was this continuously, or were there periods of time where the Cassios might be visiting, and then months might go by before they'd come back?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were yourself gone for periods of time, is that correct?
Yes.
You next had somebody named Vinny. Did you know his last name?
No, I don't know it.
You said, well, he spent the night occasionally, I think. Do you know when that was?
The actual dates of when? Or?
If you know them.
No, I don't know the actual dates of when.
In general, when did you see Vinny?
Generally, I saw Vinny when Frank was there.
And when did you start seeing Vinny?
Probably in 2002, right around there. I don't know the exact time frame.
Maybe late 2002?
Could have been, yes.
Alright, so you didn't really see him the entire time that you were working there?
No.
He was a more recent visitor?
Yes.
Same with Mark Schaffel. You said he was not there, or he did not spend the night very often. You recall seeing him every once in a while?
Every once in a while. Granted, I worked 2-3 days a week, so I wasn't there all during the week.
I understand.
But occasionally he was there, yes.
And was he there continuously during a period of time, or off and on, are two different distinct periods of time?
I remember him being there just off and on, odd times. He would just come out and, he may stay the night, he may leave that day.
You mentioned Ronald Konitzer and you said you recognized the name, but you couldn't really put a face to that name. Is that correct?
I don't believe I could, no.
You remember Mr. Konitzer being listed as a guest, is that correct?
Yes.
You remember seeing the name anyway.
Yes.
In the context of being a guest, do you remember Mr. Konitzer's wife and children being listed as guests?
I don't remember that, no.
Alright, now, if they were guests, there's a good chance they would be in the guest logs, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you mentioned Dieter Weisner. You said you saw him visiting several times, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know when this period of time was? Was this the entire time from 1998?
No, it would have been later into when I worked there, probably around, again, late 02, end of 2002, into 2003.
Into 2003, okay. Now, in general, besides intruders, which we talked about, actual trespassers and people who intrude, were there other concerns for security on the ranch?
Meaning?
Well, for instance, was one of the concerns that this was Michael Jackson's home and that his privacy should be preserved?
Yes.
So there were confidentiality agreements that new visitors would sign when they came to the gate, is that correct?
Correct. I'm sorry, yes.
I didn't know if the court reporter got it.
I'm sorry.
And one of the reasons for the confidentiality agreements was, or one of the provisions was that people not take pictures when they're at the ranch, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you understood the reason for that to be that people would sell pictures if they could, is that right?
I understood the reason to be we were told not to let them do it. What they did with them is.
You understand that. There was a concern about people getting cameras on the ranch to take pictures to sell them to the tabloids?
I'm sure that there was.
And some of the intruders that you caught had cameras with them, is that correct?
Yes.
Were you aware of an armed intruder getting onto the ranch?
Armed with what?
With a gun.
No.
The ranch itself you understood to be Mr. Jackson's home, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that security was instructed to do was to accord Mr. Jackson respect as a person who is trying to live in his home, correct?
Absolutely.
So the idea was to not unduly approach him or burden him, or take up his time while he's trying to be at home, correct?
That's correct.
And have you ever worked for any other celebrities or people of that sort?
No.
But that made sense to you, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Alright, when you say that when Mr. Jackson was there people were on pins and needles, did you mean by that to suggest that Mr. Jackson was a harsh or mean boss of some sort?
No.
Just. The structure of the people there, through the various commands and different departments, made everybody aware that when Mr. Jackson's on property that you need to be on your best behavior, right?
Yes.
And you didn't see anything wrong with that, did you?
No. Not necessarily, no.
Okay, and you felt personally that. I suppose you probably felt you should be on your best behavior at all times, is that right?
Yes.
But you didn't have any objection to everybody being, particularly careful to be prepared and ready to perform their duties when the owner is on the property, right?
I had no objection to that. No.
Now, you said people worked harder when Mr. Jackson was there, right?
They worked more, for sure.
Okay, now, there's sometimes Mr. Jackson was not there when there were big events that were scheduled, is that right?
That's correct.
There were family days?
Yes.
And you've gone to family days, have you not?
Several of them.
Do you have family? I won't go into details. But did you bring family members with you?
Yes.
And this is something that Mr. Jackson did for his employees, is that right?
That's right.
Basically opened up the whole property. The employees could bring their children, their friends or their close friends or relatives certainly, and could enjoy the rides and all the other amenities at Neverland. Is that right?
That's right.
Mr. Jackson would sometimes be there and sometimes not, is that right?
That's right.
And then there were other days when he would have large groups of either, for instance, disadvantaged children or children who were sick or just children in general who would come to be his guest at the ranch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
During those times, Mr. Jackson was often not on the property, is that right?
Often not on the property?
Yes.
That's right.
And he was sometimes on the property, is that correct?
Yes.
Whether he was on the property or not, the entire staff was instructed to treat all of the people, adults and children, as guests, as if they were guests at somebody's private home. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The only difference is that there would be certain boundaries, you can't go into certain parts of the house and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But other than that, if the kids want something, if the adults want something, everybody is there to serve. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, you mentioned that the security guards often did the job of other. Let me withdraw that. You mentioned the security guards worked with the fire department from time to time. Is that correct?
Basically, they were the same department.
Alright, and you had at least one fire truck there?
Yes.
Was there a time when you had more than one?
Well, there was a time when I was there was a time that there was more than one was not working.
Okay.
But there were two, and then prior to me being there, yes, there was, I believe, more than one.
Eventually they turned one of those fire trucks into a water truck, I think.
Water tender, yes.
There you go. But they have one operating professional fire truck there, is that correct?
Not in the sense, fire rescue, like a brush truck. It would be not like a large city fire truck. But, yes, a working, held water, medical equipment.
Alright, not a hook and ladder, but something that was an emergency vehicle.
Yes.
That could be used to tend to emergencies on this ranch, correct?
Correct.
And anywhere from somebody being injured, to having a brush fire, to anything else that was needed on an emergency basis. Is that right?
Yes.
And both the people who were assigned as security officers and those assigned as firemen were somewhat interchangeable in these tasks. If it needed to be done, you all would respond and do it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, there were a number of people who were in the fire department from time to time who eventually became employed in other fire departments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, so this was an area where people could work, gain additional experience in order to go work someplace else. Is that right?
Yes.
And did you feel, as a professional law enforcement officer, did you feel that the operation was run professionally?
Yes.
Alright, now, the duties of security and fire you said were pretty much merged. But in addition to those duties, you also had duties to attend to the needs of guests and Mr. Jackson, or anybody else who required some assistance on the ranch. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they were not always law enforcement duties or fire duties, correct?
Generally, no.
Generally not. So, if somebody needed something, you or anybody else that worked there, say a guest needed something, you or anybody else that worked there was expected to respond as favorably as possible. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
Counsel, take our break.
Okay, thank you.